The snow fell softly on the windshield of Staff Sergeant James Cooper's black Ford Ranger as he drove up the winding mountain road to Blue Pine Ski Resort. The afternoon sun was already starting to hide behind the tall peaks, casting long shadows across the snow-covered landscape. Cooper had been driving for 6 hours straight, wanting to get away from everything and everyone after his third tour in Afghanistan. The truck's heater hummed quietly as he navigated the final turns. His military training kept his eyes moving, scanning the road ahead and checking his mirrors out of habit. Even here, thousands of miles from any combat zone, those instincts stayed with him. The radio played quiet country music, but Cooper was barely listening. His mind was focused on the promise of peace he hoped to find in these mountains. As he approached the resort's main entrance, Cooper noticed the parking lot was fuller than he'd expected. A large banner hung across the lodge entrance. "Welcome to the 35th Annual Winter Mountain Festival." He hadn't known about any festival when he'd made his reservation last week. His jaw tightened slightly. He'd been hoping for quiet. The resort looked like something from a Christmas card. The main lodge was a massive log cabin structure with stone chimneys puffing smoke into the cold mountain air. Holiday lights twinkled along the roof lines, and ski lifts moved steadily up the snowy slopes, carrying excited visitors to the trails above. Under different circumstances, Cooper might have appreciated the festive atmosphere more. He parked his truck and stepped out into the cold mountain air. His boots crunched in the fresh snow as he grabbed his duffel bag from the back seat. Cooper was dressed simply in jeans, a thick flannel shirt, and his old military jacket. The jacket wasn't for show. It was just the warmest thing he owned. At 6'2", with short brown hair and alert green eyes, he moved with the fluid grace of someone who knew how to handle himself. Inside the main lodge, Cooper found himself in a crowd of festival-goers. Families with excited children, couples in matching ski outfits, and groups of friends filled the space. The air smelled like pine, coffee, and wood smoke from the massive stone fireplace. He made his way to the front desk, where a young woman named Sarah was working. "I have a reservation for Cooper," he said quietly, placing his military ID on the counter. Sarah typed on her computer and frowned slightly. "Staff Sergeant Cooper, yes, I see your reservation here. We've had an unusual number of guests because of the festival." She looked apologetic. "The good news is we still have your cabin available. It's just, well, it's our most remote one, about half a mile from the main lodge." Cooper's expression actually softened for the first time. "That's perfect, actually. I prefer quiet." Sarah seemed relieved by his response. She processed his check-in and handed him a map along with his key. "Cabin 23. It's our last available unit. There's a small path that leads directly to it from the parking lot, or you can take the longer scenic route past the ski lifts. The cabin has its own parking spot and private hot tub on the back deck." Cooper thanked her and took the keys. As he turned to leave, he noticed a group of rough-looking men entering the lodge. They wore leather jackets with patches that read Mountain Devils NC. Their loud voices and aggressive posturing immediately caught his attention, not out of fear, but from years of assessing potential threats. He watched from the corner of his eye as they pushed their way through the crowd toward the lodge's bar. Something in Cooper's gut told him this wouldn't be the last time he'd cross paths with these men. But for now, he just wanted to get to his cabin and enjoy some peace and quiet. He stepped back out into the cold, following the path Sarah had marked on his map. The sun was setting now, painting the snow-covered mountains in shades of orange and pink. As he walked, heavy flakes continued to fall, and his boots left deep prints in the fresh powder. In the distance, Cooper could see Cabin 23, standing alone against the backdrop of pine trees and mountains. It was exactly what he'd been hoping for, isolated and peaceful. But even as he walked toward it, his mind kept returning to those bikers in the lodge. Some habits, he knew, were hard to break, and the habit of staying alert had kept him alive through 3 tours of duty. The next morning, Cooper woke up early as the sun was just starting to peek over the mountains. His first night in Cabin 23 had been peaceful, with only the sound of wind in the pine trees and occasional snow falling from branches. After his usual set of push-ups and sit-ups, he decided to head to the rental shop to get his ski equipment. The morning air was crisp and clean as Cooper walked the path back to the main lodge. Fresh snow had fallen overnight, covering his tracks from yesterday. He could see his breath forming small clouds in front of his face. Other early visitors were already heading to the slopes, their excited voices carrying through the cold air. When Cooper reached the rental shop, he noticed something was different from the peaceful scene of last night. The 5 bikers from the Mountain Devils MC were already there, crowding around the counter and giving the young rental shop worker a hard time. Cooper stood quietly in line behind them, watching and listening. "What do you mean we need insurance forms?" the largest biker demanded. His leather jacket had a patch that read Razor above the Mountain Devils logo. "We ain't signing nothing." His breath smelled of old beer, suggesting their night hadn't ended when the lodge's bar had closed. The rental shop worker, a skinny college student with a name tag reading Mike, tried to stay professional. "I'm sorry, sir, but it's resort policy. Everyone has to fill out the insurance forms before renting equipment." Another biker, this one with a long gray beard, knocked over a rack of ski goggles. "Oops," he said with a mean laugh. "Guess you'll have to clean that up." Cooper noticed how Mike's hands were shaking as he bent down to pick up the scattered goggles. The other customers in the shop were backing away, some leaving entirely. A mother hurried her 2 small children out the door, throwing nervous glances over her shoulder. "Maybe we should just take what we want," Razor said, leaning over the counter. "What are you gonna do about it, kid?" Before Mike could respond, Cooper cleared his throat. All 5 bikers turned to look at him. Cooper hadn't moved from his spot in line, but his presence seemed to fill the small shop. His stance was relaxed but ready, something the bikers picked up on instinctively. "There's a line," Cooper said quietly. His green eyes met Razor's bloodshot ones. "And you're holding it up." The shop went completely silent. Mike froze in mid-motion, still holding some goggles. The bikers looked at each other, then back at Cooper. They weren't used to anyone speaking up to them. Razor stepped toward Cooper, trying to use his height advantage. "You got something to say to us, boy?" Cooper didn't move. His expression didn't change. He simply looked at Razor with the calm, steady gaze of someone who had faced far worse threats than an angry biker. "Just that there are people waiting to rent equipment. Fill out your forms or leave. Simple as that." The other bikers spread out slightly, trying to surround Cooper. But he had already noted the positions of every shelf, counter, and possible weapon in the room. His body remained relaxed, but his mind was running through dozens of scenarios, just like he'd been trained to do. "Nice jacket," one of the younger bikers sneered, pointing at Cooper's military coat. "You play soldier or something?" "Something like that," Cooper replied evenly. For a long moment, tension filled the small shop. Then Razor spat on the floor near Cooper's boots. "We don't want your crappy equipment anyway," he growled. "Come on, boys. This place is boring." The bikers filed out, purposely knocking over more displays on their way. As they left, Razor pointed at Cooper. "We'll see you around, soldier boy. Resort ain't that big." After they were gone, Mike let out a shaky breath. "Thank you, sir. They've been causing trouble since yesterday." Cooper just nodded and stepped up to the counter. "I need skis and boots. Size 12. He started filling out the insurance forms, but his mind was working. He knew this wasn't over. The bikers would be looking for a chance to get back at him, and there would be more trouble. But for now, he had some skiing to do. Cooper spent the morning skiing on the intermediate slopes, enjoying the fresh powder and clear mountain air. He hadn't skied since before his last deployment, but his body remembered the movements. The physical activity helped clear his mind, though he remained aware of his surroundings out of habit. Around lunchtime, he headed to the resort's cafeteria. The large room was crowded with hungry skiers taking breaks from the slopes. As Cooper stood in line for food, he heard the now familiar sound of the Mountain Devils making their entrance. They pushed through the double doors, scanning the room until they spotted him. This time, the bikers had changed their approach. Instead of direct confrontation, they spread out around the cafeteria. Cooper noticed how they positioned themselves to watch him from different angles. It was almost like they were trying to use military tactics, badly. "Hey, look who it is!" Razor called out loud enough for everyone to hear. The tough guy from the rental shop. Other guests turned to stare, then quickly looked away, not wanting to get involved. Cooper ignored them and moved forward in the line, selecting a sandwich and coffee. He could hear the bikers making loud comments about his military jacket, trying to get a reaction. Their voices carried across the cafeteria, making other guests uncomfortable. "I heard these military types can't handle regular life," the gray-bearded biker said loudly. Too messed up in the head from the war. Bet he jumps at loud noises. To prove his point, the biker slammed his hand down hard on a nearby table. A family sitting there jumped up and hurried away. Cooper didn't even flinch. He heard much worse than a slapped table in Afghanistan. Finding most tables now empty near him, Cooper sat down and began eating his lunch. The bikers continued their game, moving closer. One of them, a younger member with tattoos on his neck, sat at the table right behind Cooper. "You know what I think?" the young biker said, speaking to Cooper's back. "I think your jacket's fake. Probably bought it at a thrift store to look tough." Cooper took another bite of his sandwich, chewing slowly. His mind was mapping out the positions of all 5 bikers without having to look around. He could tell by their voices and footsteps exactly where each one was. It was like a chess game, and they didn't even know they were pieces on his board. Razor walked past Cooper's table, deliberately bumping it hard enough to spill Cooper's coffee. The hot liquid spread across the table, dripping onto Cooper's jeans. Several people gasped, expecting a fight to break out. Instead, Cooper calmly grabbed some napkins and cleaned up the spill. His face showed no anger, which seemed to frustrate the bikers even more. They weren't used to someone staying so calm under their harassment. "What's wrong, soldier boy?" Razor taunted. "Too scared to do anything. Or maybe you're just not as tough as you pretend to be." Cooper finished his sandwich and stood up slowly. For the first time, he turned and looked directly at all 5 bikers. His green eyes moved from one to another, studying them with the kind of attention that made them shift uncomfortably. "You know what your problem is?" Cooper said quietly, his voice carrying in the now silent cafeteria. "You mistake patience for weakness." He picked up his tray and walked to the disposal area. As he headed toward the exit, Razor called out, "This ain't over, soldier boy. We're just getting started." Cooper paused at the door, looking back over his shoulder. "No," he said simply. "You haven't started anything yet. And if you're smart, you won't." The threat in his calm voice was clear enough that even the bikers fell silent for a moment. As Cooper walked out into the snowy afternoon, he knew the situation was getting worse. The bikers would keep pushing until something broke. He just hoped they were smart enough to back down before that happened. But based on their behavior so far, he doubted it. The afternoon sun was starting to sink behind the mountains when Cooper decided to take one final ski run. The slopes were less crowded now as many visitors headed inside to warm up. Light snow had started falling again, adding a fresh dusting to the trails. As he rode the ski lift up the mountain, Cooper noticed unusual movement near the beginner's slope. He narrowed his eyes, focusing on the scene below. The 5 Mountain Devils bikers were gathered around 2 people, an elderly man in a blue ski instructor's jacket and a young girl who couldn't have been more than 12 years old. Cooper's jaw tightened as he watched Razor push the old instructor, making him stumble in the snow. The young girl was crying, trying to hide behind her instructor. Other skiers were hurrying past, pretending not to see what was happening. The resort's security was nowhere in sight. When Cooper reached the top of the lift, he didn't head toward his planned trail. Instead, he skied directly toward the beginner's slope, moving fast but controlled. As he got closer, he could hear what was happening. "You crashed into my friend's snowmobile." Razor was yelling at the old instructor. "That's going to cost you big time." The instructor tried to stay calm for his student's sake. "Sir, I've been teaching on this slope all day. We haven't been anywhere near the snowmobile area. You must be mistaken." "Are you calling me a liar, old man?" Razor grabbed the front of the instructor's jacket. The young girl started crying harder. "Please," the instructor said, "I have a student here. We can discuss this at the lodge." Razor shoved the old man, making him fall backward into the snow. The other bikers laughed as the instructor struggled to get up, his skis making it difficult. The young girl screamed, "Leave him alone." "Shut up, kid," the gray-bearded biker growled, making her shrink back in fear. Cooper had seen enough. He smoothly skied to a stop nearby, sending up a spray of snow. His voice cut through the cold air like a knife. "Step away from them, now." The bikers turned, their faces showing both anger and satisfaction at seeing him. They had been hoping to run into Cooper again, but hadn't expected him to find them here. "Well, look who it is," Razor sneered. "The fake soldier wants to play hero." Cooper took off his skis, planting them in the snow. His movements were unhurried but purposeful. "Last warning," he said quietly. "Walk away." Or what? Razor laughed. There's 5 of us and 1 of you, and we're not in the rental shop now. Tough guy. The young girl helped the instructor to his feet while the bikers were distracted. Cooper noticed them slowly backing away and gave them a small nod. The instructor understood, carefully guiding his student toward the safety of the nearby ski lodge. You know what? Razor said, cracking his knuckles. I'm getting tired of your attitude. Boys, let's teach Soldier Boy here what happens when you mess with the mountain devils. The bikers spread out in a half circle around Cooper, their boots crunching in the snow. Cooper didn't move except to unzip his military jacket, giving himself better freedom of movement. His face showed no fear, no anger, just focused concentration. 5 against 1, Cooper said calmly. Somehow that still seems unfair. He paused, then added, for you. Something in his voice made 2 of the bikers hesitate. They had jumped plenty of people before, but something was different about this man. The way he stood, the way he watched them, it wasn't like their usual victims. Get him, Razor shouted, and the bikers charged forward through the snow. Cooper's stance shifted slightly, his muscles tensing. In Afghanistan, he had learned that the most dangerous moments required the greatest calm. As the bikers rushed toward him, time seemed to slow down. His training took over, and he knew exactly what he needed to do. The 5 bikers rushed toward Cooper through the snow, their boots kicking up white powder. Cooper remained perfectly still, his military training telling him to let them make the first move. His eyes tracked each attacker's position, noting their poor balance and uncoordinated approach. Razor reached him first, throwing a wild punch at Cooper's head. Cooper simply stepped aside, letting the biker's momentum carry him forward into empty air. The movement was so smooth that Razor stumbled face first into the snow, confused about how he had missed. Stop, Cooper said calmly, his voice carrying across the slope. This is your last chance to walk away. The gray-bearded biker and the one with neck tattoos came at him from both sides. Cooper shook his head slightly. It was a basic flanking move, but their timing was off. He waited until the last second, then shifted his weight. The 2 bikers crashed into each other where Cooper had been standing a moment before. You're making a mistake, Cooper warned, still keeping his voice steady. I don't want to hurt any of you. The remaining 2 bikers hesitated, looking at each other uncertainly. Their 3 friends were already picking themselves up from the snow, looking embarrassed and angry. Razor's face was red with rage as he wiped snow from his beard. Get him, you idiots, Razor shouted. He's just one guy. Cooper sighed. He had hoped they would listen to reason, but some people could only learn the hard way. As the bikers regrouped for another attack, he subtly changed his stance. His feet shifted in the snow, finding perfect balance. His hands came up slightly, not in fists, but ready. Last warning, Cooper said. I am a staff sergeant in the United States Army Special Forces. I've had extensive training in hand-to-hand combat. If you continue this fight, I will defend myself. Is that clear? For a moment, doubt showed on some of the bikers' faces. They had jumped plenty of people before, but something about Cooper's calm confidence made them nervous. The younger ones looked at Razor, waiting for his decision. But Razor was too angry to think clearly. Special Forces? He laughed. Yeah, right. Get him. All 5 bikers charged at once, thinking their numbers would overwhelm Cooper. They didn't understand that they were attacking someone who had trained for years to handle multiple opponents. Someone who had been in real combat situations where hesitation meant death. Cooper's eyes narrowed slightly as he watched them approach. He could see every mistake in their attack, their poor footwork in the snow, their wild swings that would leave them off balance, their failure to protect their vulnerable points. In Afghanistan, he had faced trained fighters who were trying to kill him. These bikers, despite their size and aggression, were amateurs in comparison. Remember, Cooper said quietly, almost to himself, you chose this. As the bikers closed in, Cooper remained completely calm. He knew exactly what he would do, how much force to use, and how to end this quickly without causing serious injury. His mind was clear, focused only on the task at hand. The world seemed to slow down around him. Cooper could hear the wind in the pine trees, the distant sound of ski lifts running, and the crunch of boots in snow. He saw the elderly ski instructor and the young girl watching from the safety of the lodge's window. He noticed other skiers stopping to watch from a safe distance. This wasn't what Cooper had wanted when he came to the resort. He had been looking for peace and quiet, a chance to enjoy the mountains and forget about violence for a while. But sometimes, he knew, peace had to be defended. Razor's fist came swinging toward his face, and Cooper made his decision. These men needed to learn a lesson about picking fights with strangers, and he was about to become their teacher. As Razor's punch came toward his face, Cooper moved with the fluid grace of a trained fighter. He deflected the punch with his left arm while stepping to the side, using Razor's own momentum to send him stumbling past. In the same smooth motion, Cooper caught Razor's extended arm and applied pressure to a specific point near the elbow. Razor let out a surprised yelp of pain as his arm went numb. He hadn't even seen Cooper move. 1 second he was throwing a punch. The next he was on his knees in the snow, his arm useless at his side. The gray-bearded biker came in next, throwing wild hooks with both hands. Cooper ducked under the attacks and swept the man's legs out from under him. The biker landed hard on his back, the air rushing from his lungs with a loud whoosh. "Stay down," Cooper advised calmly. "You're done." The biker with neck tattoos pulled out a small knife, its blade glinting in the winter sunlight. Cooper's eyes narrowed. Now things were getting serious. The young biker jabbed the knife forward, trying to look threatening, but his hand was shaking. Cooper moved like lightning. He grabbed the biker's wrist, twisted sharply, and the knife fell into the snow. In one continuous motion, he turned the biker's arm behind his back and pressed up slightly. The man dropped to his knees, gasping in pain. "That was a mistake," Cooper said quietly. "A big one." The two remaining bikers looked at each other, then tried to rush Cooper from both sides. He waited until the last possible moment before stepping back, letting them crash into each other. As they stumbled, Cooper grabbed each one by the back of their jackets and knocked their heads together, not hard enough to cause serious injury, but enough to stun them. The entire fight had lasted less than 30 seconds. All 5 bikers were on the ground, groaning in pain, but not seriously hurt. Cooper stood calmly in the middle, his breathing barely elevated. He hadn't even broken a sweat. Razor tried to get up, but his arm still wouldn't work properly. "What? What did you do to me?" he gasped. "Pressure point manipulation," Cooper explained. "The feeling will come back in about 10 minutes. Just stay down and think about your choices." The gray-bearded biker had managed to sit up, holding his ribs where he'd landed. "You're really special forces, aren't you?" Cooper nodded. "I tried to warn you. 3 tours in Afghanistan taught me how to handle multiple opponents. You never had a chance." By now, a small crowd had gathered at a safe distance. Someone had called the resort's security, and 2 guards were hurrying across the snow toward them. The elderly ski instructor and his young student had come out of the lodge to watch. The biker with the neck tattoos was still on his knees, his arm held awkwardly behind him. "Please," he wheezed, "let me go. We're sorry." Cooper released his hold, and the biker collapsed forward into the snow. The 2 who had knocked heads were sitting up slowly, looking dazed and embarrassed. "Listen carefully," Cooper said, addressing all 5 bikers. "I'm going to be here for 3 more days. If I see any of you causing trouble again, any trouble at all, what just happened will feel like a gentle massage compared to what I'll do next. Understand?" They'd all nodded quickly. Even Razor, who was still on his knees testing his tingling arm, looked away when Cooper met his eyes. The resort security guards finally reached them, out of breath from running through the deep snow. They looked uncertainly between Cooper and the fallen bikers, not sure what to make of the scene. "These men were harassing an instructor and his student," Cooper explained calmly. "They also pulled a knife. I suggest calling the local police." As the guards radioed for backup, Cooper picked up his skis from where he planted them in the snow. The young girl who had been watching ran up to him. "That was amazing," she said, her eyes wide with admiration. "Are you really a soldier?" Cooper allowed himself a small smile. "I am, but right now, I'm just a guy who wants to enjoy skiing in peace." 2 police cars pulled up to the resort's main entrance, their lights flashing against the snow. Officer Sarah Martinez and her partner stepped out into the cold afternoon air, followed by 2 more officers from the second car. The resort's security guards had called them about a disturbance involving the Mountain Devils motorcycle gang. Inside the lodge's main office, Cooper sat calmly in a chair, giving his statement to Officer Martinez. The elderly ski instructor, who had introduced himself as Bob Wilson, sat nearby with his young student Emma and her parents. "So you're telling me you took down all 5 of them without throwing a single punch?" Officer Martinez asked, looking up from her notepad with raised eyebrows. Cooper nodded. "Yes, ma'am. I used defensive techniques to neutralize the threat while minimizing harm. They'll have some bruises, but nothing serious." Bob spoke up from his chair. "It was incredible. I've never seen anything like it. Those thugs had been harassing people at the resort all day, and when they pushed me down in front of Emma," he shook his head, "this young man stepped in and handled them like they were children." Emma's parents couldn't stop thanking Cooper. "We've been coming to this resort for years," Emma's father said. "Those bikers have been causing trouble in the whole region for months, but nobody could catch them doing anything serious enough for arrest." Officer Martinez smiled. "Well, today they made several big mistakes. Assault, harassment, and pulling a knife in front of witnesses. That's more than enough to press charges. Plus, we found some interesting items on their motorcycles that they'll need to explain." Through the office window, Cooper could see the other officers leading the handcuffed bikers to their patrol cars. Razor was still rubbing his arm where Cooper had hit the pressure point. The biker's earlier confidence was gone, replaced by a look of shame and defeat. The resort manager, a tall man named Mr. Thompson, hurried into the office. "Staff Sergeant Cooper," he said, extending his hand. "I can't thank you enough for what you did. Those men have been scaring away our guests for weeks. We tried to get more security, but it's been difficult finding qualified people willing to work up here." Cooper shook his hand. "I just wanted a quiet ski vacation," he said with a slight smile. "About that," Mr. Thompson said eagerly, "I'd like to offer you a lifetime of free stays at Blue Pine Resort. Anytime you want to come skiing, just call us. We'll have our best cabin ready for you." Before Cooper could respond, Emma tugged on his sleeve. "Will you teach me some of those moves?" she asked hopefully. "I want to learn how to defend myself like that." Cooper looked at her parents, who nodded their approval. "Tell you what," he said to Emma. "I know some simple self-defense techniques that anyone can learn. Maybe tomorrow I can show you a few basics, with your parents' permission, of course." Emma's face lit up with excitement. "Really? That would be so cool." Officer Martinez finished writing her report and stood up. "Well, Staff Sergeant Cooper, we'll need you to come down to the station tomorrow to sign some paperwork, but otherwise we're done here. Those men won't be bothering anyone for quite a while." As people began leaving the office, Bob the ski instructor approached Cooper one last time. "You know," he said quietly, "I was in Vietnam many years ago. I recognized your moves, some of them anyway. Special Forces?" Cooper nodded. "3 tours in Afghanistan." Bob smiled knowingly. "I thought so. The way you handled yourself, staying calm, giving them every chance to walk away. That's the mark of a true professional." He patted Cooper on the shoulder. "Welcome to Blue Pine Resort, son. It's good to have you here." Cooper watched through the window as the police cars drove away with the bikers. The sun was setting behind the mountains, painting the snow in shades of orange and pink. Skiers were still enjoying the slopes, and the peaceful atmosphere he'd been looking for seemed to have finally settled over the resort. "Maybe now," Cooper thought to himself, "I can finally get that quiet ski vacation I came here for." The next morning dawned clear and cold at Blue Pine Resort. Fresh snow had fallen overnight, covering yesterday's tracks and making the mountain look pristine again. Cooper woke up early in his cabin, did his usual morning exercises, and stepped out onto the deck to breathe in the crisp mountain air. News of yesterday's events had spread quickly through the resort. As Cooper walked to the main lodge for breakfast, other guests smiled and nodded at him. Some even stopped to shake his hand. It wasn't the anonymity he'd been hoping for, but he appreciated their genuine gratitude. In the lodge's restaurant, Bob the ski instructor waved him over to join him for breakfast. "The whole resort's talking about what happened," Bob said as Cooper sat down with his coffee and eggs. "Those mountain devils have been terrorizing this area for months. Nobody else had the courage to stand up to them." Cooper shrugged modestly. "Sometimes people just need to be shown there are consequences for their actions." He took a sip of his coffee. "I heard from Officer Martinez this morning. They found stolen property in the bikers' saddlebags. Looks like they'll be going away for a while." After breakfast, Cooper kept his promise to Emma. In a quiet corner of the resort's gym, with her parents watching, he showed her some basic self-defense moves. The young girl paid careful attention as Cooper demonstrated how to break free from a grab and how to stand in a way that maintained proper balance. Remember? Cooper told her, the best self-defense is avoiding trouble in the first place. These techniques are only for when you have no other choice. Emma nodded seriously. Like when you helped Mr. Wilson yesterday. Exactly, Cooper smiled. But notice that I tried talking first. Fighting should always be the last resort. Later that afternoon, Cooper met with Mr. Thompson in the resort office to discuss the lifetime ski pass the manager had offered. Despite Cooper's protests that it wasn't necessary, Mr. Thompson insisted. You've done more for this resort in one day than our security team has managed in months, the manager said. Those bikers were scaring away our guests and ruining our reputation. The least we can do is make sure you always have a place here. Cooper finally accepted the pass, thinking about future winters spent in the peaceful mountains. Maybe this could become his retreat, a place to find the quiet he sometimes needed after difficult missions. As the sun began to set, Cooper took one final ski run for the day. The slopes were quiet now, with most guests heading in for dinner. The only sounds were the swish of his skis through the powder and the wind in the pine trees. This was what he'd been looking for when he came to Blue Pine Resort: peace, solitude, and the simple joy of skiing. At the bottom of the slope, he found Bob waiting with Emma and her family. They were planning to have dinner in the lodge and wanted to know if he'd join them. Cooper agreed, realizing that sometimes the best kind of peace wasn't about being alone. It was about being with good people. Over dinner, Bob shared stories about his time in Vietnam, while Emma excitedly demonstrated the self-defense moves she'd learned. Other guests stopped by their table to thank Cooper again, but they were respectful and didn't stay long. Looking around the warm, friendly lodge, Cooper felt something he hadn't expected to find on this trip. It wasn't just the peace and quiet he'd been seeking. It was a sense of belonging. These mountains, this resort, and these people had somehow worked their way past his usual reserve. As he walked back to his cabin that night under a sky full of stars, Cooper smiled to himself. He'd come to Blue Pine Resort looking for solitude, but he found something better. He found a place where he could be himself, not just a soldier, but a man who'd stood up for what was right. And in doing so, he gained not just a lifetime ski pass, but a lifetime of welcome among good people who understood the true meaning of peace. The mountain air was cold and clear, and the only sound was the crunch of his boots in the snow. Cooper looked up at the stars, feeling truly at peace for the first time in a long while. He knew he'd be coming back to Blue Pine Resort, not just for the skiing, but for the peace of home he'd unexpectedly found here.